On any given Sunday morning, you can't get far online without running into a church live stream. Thousands of them. Some with a handful of views, some with tens of thousands. Different cities, different styles, different stages and lighting rigs and worship bands, and yet the average church attendance across America keeps falling. For a lot, the seats aren't filling back up. Here's what happened. When the pandemic hit, churches were forced online. Zoom, YouTube, Facebook Live, they became the big things. It wasn't the same as being together. I mean, nothing could touch the community a church was supposed to give. But in the middle of no community at all, it was better than nothing. So churches poured money, resources, time, and energy into making an online impact. And then the restrictions lifted. Churches opened back up. People missed the hugs, the conversations, the handshakes, the feeling of being in a room together. So they came back. Well, sort of. Because something interesting happened. For many, the online numbers held steady, but the seats stayed partially empty. I've worked at a lot of large churches and small churches in the years since the pandemic ended, and every single one has the same story. Not everyone came back, and a new group quietly emerged. A group that still loved Jesus. They were just done with church. Hey, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. This is the podcast where we have real and raw conversations about what healthy ministry and healthy leadership should actually look like within our churches to make sure that we're being more Christ-like and less like the world. If this is your first time here, like this video and then subscribe to make sure that you don't miss a single piece of content that we drop, as we do it on a weekly basis. And more than anything, if today's episode hits you like it hit me as I was writing it, you're going to want to share it with someone, because today's conversation is for the ministry leader as well as for the duns that are sitting at home watching and clicking away on their couches. There's a new group that I mentioned at the very beginning, and one of the terms that's been given to them is the duns. They're people who still believe in God, still pray, still follow Jesus, or at least they're trying to. They've just decided that they're done with the institution. They're done with the structure, done with the system. And if we're honest, I don't know if I can entirely blame them. I mean, think about what some of them have walked through within their life and within the church. They've experienced splits within the church. They've experienced and maybe been part of gossip. They've seen division. Leaders who were meant to protect them instead have been removed, or should have been removed, because of what they were doing. Congregations were victimized. And when the leaders were dealt a blow of punishment or whatever, it was more just like a slap on the wrist. They've experienced manipulation, spiritual abuse, finances mishandled. They watched everything we've been talking about this season long, and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about throughout this entire podcast. The optics, the cover-ups, the leaders who said one thing and then lived another, and they decided they were done. So they found a workaround. They could watch online. They could get their fix, hear a good message, and sing along if they felt like it. And when it got too heavy, or when the convictions started to flow, maybe it was a little bit too complicated, they could just switch the speaker or click off. There was no commitment or accountability needed. It was just content on demand when they liked it. Like any good Netflix series, they could binge it as much as they want when they were feeling it, and then take weeks off when they weren't feeling it. Here's the problem with that, though. When we treat the church like Netflix, Jesus and his community become content, not covenant. Now, I want to be careful here, because I think before we can answer whether or not this system, this habit that people have picked up is a problem, I think we need to ask whether we actually understand why they left. Because if you're watching this and you're one of the duns, I don't want this to be something that's all about shaming you. Because more than anything, I know that some of you left because you had to. The environment that you were in within your church, some of you, it might not have been safe. The leaders weren't trustworthy. The culture itself many times were toxic. And sometimes the most spiritual and healthy decision that we can make is to leave a bad situation, especially a bad situation that is damaging your faith. I mean, we tell people all the time, if you see the signs, protect yourself. So if that is the choice that you made, I'm not going to tell you or someone who has been spiritually abused that they just need to, suck it up and go back. That's not what this episode's about. But here's where I gently want to push back just a little bit. I want to be honest because more than anything, I actually care. Leaving a bad situation is not the same as leaving a church, altogether. If I'm talking to a student and they got badly burned in a relationship as a young teenager, which sometimes they do. Let's say it's a guy and they're talking about how a girl led them on and hurt them, and for a while they were just a little bit messed up. Do I look at that person and say, that's it, never date ever again, marriage out the window, no relationships whatsoever, it's all done because of one bad instance, and all you're going to do for the rest of your life is just sit there and watch romantic comedies over and over and over again by yourself? That's not the answer. What I'm going to tell them is they're going to take time to heal, but they eventually need to realize that those things are warning signs and they need to be more careful and know now what to watch out for when it comes to those things, and to set up boundaries that they know they won't accept these things out of a relationship. And in the same way, we don't need to throw out the whole concept because one version of it hurt us. And yet that's what some of us have done with the church. So to the duns that are watching this, yes, your pain is real and your hesitation, it makes sense. But staying alone for the rest of your walk is not the healthiest thing that you can do, and it's not the answer. And honestly, here's why that matters. If you want to know what the church was designed to look like, don't look at the modern church and what we've built. There are some really good examples, but there's also not some good examples. Instead, we need to go back to the very basic, fundamental church that was created in Acts chapter 2. We look at when it first started, and the disciples and the followers, they sold their possessions. They gave to anyone that had need. They had meals together. They ate together. They prayed together. They challenged each other. They met daily. The role of deacons were actually raised up specifically to care for the widows so that no one had need within their groups. I mean, they were so deeply connected, so genuinely community, that the early church grew not because they had some great marketing campaign or some awesome strategy. Maybe it was because of a well-produced live stream. No, it was because people looked at what was happening with them and said, I want that. They said, what is this? And that is in the face of growth in the midst of persecution. I mean, who wants to sign up for something that you know is going to get you hurt, injured, or possibly dead? And yet the church continued to reproduce and continue to grow and continue to spread out in the face of all that, because what they were doing with Christ within them was so alive that other people knew that that was what they were missing. That is what the church that we are a part of was actually designed to be. And when we opt out of community, even if it's for understandable reasons, we miss more than we realize. We miss the relationships, the provisions, the accountability that we so desperately need. We miss people who know our faces and our names and can ask us questions when we're not okay. We miss the face-to-face conversations that actually change things within us and challenge our faith a little bit, because it's a lot easier to hide when your church attendance is a series of clicks rather than people who can see your face on a weekly basis. We've embraced a low-level commitment of faith that doesn't really cost us that much. And more than anything, it's a level of faith that can be turned on and off whenever we don't feel like it. And I want to say something that might land a little bit hard. And when I say it, it's not to be harsh, but it's to be honest. A faith built alone with no community, with no accountability, where no one knows your name. It's a stool with one leg. And yes, at certain points it feels like it can support you. But when the pressure comes in, that's when you realize it's not something that you can actually balance on. And the pressure always comes. And eventually it'll knock you down. I know this personally, because when my youngest daughter was born, she was born with a skin disorder, as I've shared on this podcast. It was a skin disorder that I genetically passed down to my daughter. And within the first couple of months, we had some different issues that arose, and at one point they thought that the blisters were growing within her esophagus and her nasal passages, and so they had to rush her to the hospital. And while she was at the hospital, it was in the height of COVID, and so because of that, my wife and her were locked within the hospital for a little over a week, and me and my oldest daughter were holding down the house. Now, at the same time, I was battling with this skin disorder, and I was, lack of sleep, tired, not able to see my new baby, not able to see not able to see my wife. And in the process of that, I was also wrestling with this idea that I had something to do with her skin disorder, and it was messing me up. And I remember at one point, I just hit a low point, and I didn't know what to do. The thoughts were overwhelming. The fears were there. I was broken. But I had a small group that I was part of. And in that small group, there were a bunch of men that I had built a relationship with. And so in a moment of vulnerability, I reached out and called one of those men that I trusted. He told me to come over to his house. And so me and my daughter went, and she ended up sleeping there. And I went and talked with him half the night. In that moment, the 6-foot rule didn't apply to us, because more than anything, I needed that contact, and I needed that connection. I needed that community. And we talked and we shared, and I probably bawled my eyes out, but I also poured my heart out, and he listened, and he was there, and he cared. And more than anything, in that moment, it was that God community that was set up, those relationships that were built. He listened. He allowed me to process, and then he also challenged me in a healthy way. And because of that, it helped me overcome that step. And in that moment, it was the community that I needed, and it was a godsend. It was something that God had set up and put on my heart in that moment and on his heart in that moment. And can I tell you what? Those are the moments where community matters, where you are weighed down, where you are broken. And the truth is, you're not going to find that connection online as much as you will in person. And believe me, I've been there before. That is when community matters. That is when our church truly matters and shines, when God can move through other people on behalf of your life. He didn't let me stay in that spiral. And the help didn't come from an app. It didn't come from a live stream, and it didn't come from sermons on demand from a couch. It came from time, community, trust, and a real church mentality lived out in real life. genuinely don't know where I would have been if it had not been for that connection in that moment. A famous parable within the scriptures is that of the lost sheep. And I know when we read it, it's written as Jesus, the great shepherd who goes out of his way for that one sheep. And I think sometimes we're used to the Sunday school version that we're like, he kind of turns the corner and there's that lost sheep. He left the 99 to find that one. But when I read it, I understand that this was not just turning the corner. This sheep had wandered off and he left the 99 to go search out that one. And it wasn't just a little walk. It was a hike. It was climbing over rocks and climbing through trees and scaling down cliffs. When sheep wander away, sometimes they wander. They just keep on going. This is a major search that required effort, energy, stress, sweat. And yet the shepherd did it because that is the heart of our Savior. But here's the question that I want to leave with every leader that's watching this video. We are called to imitate Christ. We're called to be like him, to follow his example. So, do we, as shepherds over the congregation, who are meant to imitate Christ, do we have that same heart as Christ? Would we leave our comfortable positions to reach back to someone who used to attend? Would we notice if they were gone? Would we make the call, or would we show up for them to ask them, to share with them? And here's the harder question, the one that is going to land hard and a bit differently depending on who you are. Before we step out of our comfort zones and out of our churches to call the Duns back to the fellowship, before we put a welcome mat in front of our door and talk about how the church is family and how we need to be together and build that community, I think we need to ask ourselves a serious question. What are we calling them back to? Because if it's an Acts 2 kind of community where people matter, where they provide for one another, where there's spiritual accountability, where they're being built up, where the needs are being taken care of, where there is love that is flowing out, where people are being changed and transformed, then that's great. Bring them back in. But if it's a high before a service, sitting around for an hour and then just going home, where it's small groups that gossip and slander and divide each other rather than bearing one another's burdens, where it's a church family that's more about the brand than community, then odds are we shouldn't invite them back out. Because if we want the Duns to come back, we should want that, the Acts 2 style church. And we have to be honest about whether or not that is something that we are building. And then ask the bigger question, is that what we're building worth something coming back to? And if it isn't, I think the bigger question that we need to ask before we invite them back out is what we're building worth them coming back to. Now, I want to speak to two different people for just a moment. To the Dun that is watching this, I see you, and in some cases I understand why you left. And I'm not here to guilt you back through that door, because maybe you've genuinely been hurt. But I am going to be honest with you. The isolated faith that many of you have built, just you and Jesus and a good sermon click here or there. I mean, with Jesus, you don't need much of anything else. But the community that you have there, it's not designed to hold the weight of the different things that come through your life. We were made for community, not just the performance, not just the Instagram version of community, but the real, messy, sometimes frustrating, occasionally glorious things that happen when people who are committed to God actually do life together. And if you've been hurt, keep healing. Take the time to process and heal with God as you need. But don't stop looking for a community worth belonging to, because they exist and you are made to be part of one. And to the leaders who are watching this, before you start strategizing about how to get them all back within your church, I want you to sit with the harder question first. What are you building? Is it something that would have caught someone before they had ever drifted? Is it something that notices when a person hasn't showed up in a few weeks? Maybe it's something where people know and care about each other and their names, not just their seats. Because the Duns didn't all leave because they're uncommitted. Maybe in some cases they did. But some of them, they left because nobody came after them. Nobody helped process that pain and that hurt when they went through it. In some cases, nobody shepherded them. And that's on us. The early church wasn't growing because of production value. The early church was growing because people looked at it and what it was producing and what was happening within the Christians, and they couldn't explain what they saw. The love, the generosity, the accountability, the growth, the fulfillment, the way that they cared for each other and looked to God more than anything. And that is what we are supposed to be building as the church. Not a Netflix programming with a good catalog of sermons, but instead a community where people are known, where people are missed. Missed when they're gone, when they haven't showed up, and cared for when they're injured and broken. A church where the one matters as much as the 99. So here's the challenge this week. Think of one person who used to be part of your community and they're not anymore. And don't guilt them back. Don't try to force them back into a seat, but just reach out to them. Let them know that they still are noticed, that they're still cared for, and to ask how they're doing. Because that's the shepherd's heart in action. That's what the church was always supposed to look like. Well, next week, we're going to dive into a topic that's a little more sci-fi, a little more out of this world. But I think it's a conversation that we definitely need to start having. Until then, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. Let's stop building platforms and start building people. Until then, I'll see you next week, and I'll see you in the comments.